welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. And I'm Ginny Bianco Mathis on the East Coast, and I'm here with my partner, Mitch Simon, on the West Coast. And we are so excited today to have a very accomplished person in our field and writer, Dave Youre. And Dave is an expert in helping individuals, teams, organizations achieve excellence by doing the ordinary things extraordinarily well. He's the CEO of Outfield Leadership and the author of The Self-Evolved Leader. Wait for it. This goes on a while. Elevate your focus. Develop your people in a world that refuses to slow down. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Jenny. Hey, Mitch. Great to be here with both of you.
Good to have you here.
Yes, wonderful. So, as I said, the author of The Self-Evolved Leader. So please share with us what you've learned and how you previously evolved and personally evolved during these events in the last 18 months.
Gosh, wow. Yes. What a journey it's been for all of us over these last 18 months. I think for me, my journey has been about two things. One, stripping away, I think, some superfluous and unimportant aspects of my life that had sort of accreted over time. I think that when we live in a really busy world, we start doing things and things glom onto us, and then it becomes routine, ritual, habit, and then when you get to a period of relative slowness, you look back and you go, I don't know why I do that thing, or I don't know why I chase after that bit of work. And so just a stripping down of what's truly important for me, and then just also intentionality, being really clear and intentional about what I am saying yes to, rather than just saying yes to everything and then figuring out what to do.
Oh, totally identify with that. It's almost feels like getting clean in a way, doesn't it? What do we really want to focus on? Love it.
Very much so.
Well, I know for a fact, because I have been reading your book, and there are a lot of wonderful themes in there. But could you share with us what you think are the major 3 or 4 areas that you want people to know? Here's what you're going to get out of this.
Well, one of the main reasons that I wrote the book was I do a lot of leadership training and working with teams, and I was finding that there are some hangovers from some of the older ways in which we used to view leadership and effective leadership, and particularly this focus on this need for certainty, that a strong and a good and effective leader, knows where we're going and has certainty and is leading from the front, and all it takes is for you to fall in behind me and follow me, and we'll get there. And
right.
Even before the pandemic, that was starting to creak at the seams, because the world that we live in is just far too complex for any one individual to really be able to lead with true certainty. And also, whenever you show up as a leader like that, there's not as much room for the people underneath you to grow and develop. And so one of the big lessons within the book is how do we transform or turn that thinking on its head to actually show up as a leader of a degree of uncertainty that says, I'm not 100% sure where we're going. Here's my best guess. Here's where I think we should go, and how to engage in a much more collaborative process of visioning and goal setting with your team, so that it's much more a cohesive unit that's moving in a shared direction, rather than just one person out of the front and everybody else falling in behind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so now that brings us into this hybrid world that we seem to be going into. So with that, and there's a couple of concepts in your book, if you can speak to. I really like when you talk about team flow and creating a symbiotic conversation and shared responsibility. Can you give some specific behaviors? What would that look like?
Sure. So, I think the overarching context of moving in a hybrid world is further pressing home the point that we need our leaders not just to be focused on achieving our goals and where we're going, but also focused on helping and ensuring that the people underneath them are growing and developing. And that's tricky. I mean, it's difficult in a completely face to face world. It's very difficult in a virtual world, and now we're beginning to learn what that's going to be like in a hybrid world. And left to its own devices, we can very easily move into this place where we've got this two-tiered workforce in a hybrid world, where the folks that are like always coming into the office are the ones where they believe that that's where the real work gets done, and the ones
Right.
that are remaining remote, or certainly have got a bigger spread for remote, are just not involved in some of those longer term, more strategic conversations and relationship building. And I think our leaders need to be much more intentional about ensuring that they are not just they're not just returning to the office and then tagging on virtual workers as the add-on, but that it's a whole new paradigm. We've got to redesign almost our how we work together to incorporate both of those. We can't just lump on virtual to in-person work. And you take the first point there around facilitating team flow. That's all about asking the question: how can I empower and encourage my team to work on the things that they really can add value to, so that those things can get off my plate and I can focus on those things that I really truly bring value to, which is often the medium and long-term direction of your team and the development of your people. And getting into a position where you're able to, and this is an exercise I go through with many leaders, is if you're looking at your to-do list, saying to yourself, what do I need to do to streamline this down to about 20% of what's here, so that I've got my team focused on the things that they really can bring value to, and I'm left with the top 20% for me. And you do that, quite frankly, by asking yourself, for every item on your to-do list, is there somebody on my team who, even if they needed a little advice, guidance, and support, could do this thing? Then you got to take the time to do that, to delegate it out, give them that advice, guidance, and support, so that they grow, and you're able to elevate your own particular headspace to the more strategic. Now, managing that in a hybrid world is going to call for a couple of things. One, greater degree of intentionality that we just said. Number two, you've got to ensure that you've got good tools and systems at your fingertips. It's no longer enough for us just to all rely on email for getting stuff done. We've got to have a dedicated project management spot, dedicated file sharing, even to talk about really granular stuff, methods by which work can flow and be distributed around your team, so that it doesn't just glom up in the in-person discussions, but that it can move between this in-person and virtual world.
Absolutely. Folks are getting into trouble now. Mitch and I both have seen where they just are. Some of them are still using the old-fashioned lists.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, they may be on their computer, but they're just lists.
Right.
And the tools now, where there is just real decision making happening on these virtual meetings, and the sharing of the hubs and spokes of a lot of applications.
Right. And I think we're moving more and more. I think this is one step in an even greater movement, that the work has to be executed, or be able to be executed, and talked about and looked at in an almost ephemeral perspective. It's got to be available for anybody to look at any time, in any way.
Yes.
It can't live in a file cabinet. We know that much. It can't live on somebody else's desktop. It's got to live in a place that we can all access it, whether we're collectively together in an office or dialing in. And managing and leading through that is going to be tough for a lot of people, because for some at the beginning of the pandemic, it was just, look, we'll get through this virtual working nonsense, and then one day we'll all be in the office together, and we get to go
Right.
back to the way that it was,
And we'll
and
figure it out.
we'll
Yeah.
figure it out. And I think a lot of people are going, great, we're going to be back in the office, and now they're like, shoot, we've got to deal with this hybrid stuff. It's just a pain. Like, truly, organizations have to retool their perspective on how you show up as a leader and how you manage your workflow with your team, because it's completely different now.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember getting so excited when the light bulb went on for me when I was talking to a senior executive, and he had been brainstorming on something that he had shared he was going to do so. And then he goes, well, let me show you what I did. And he puts on the screen all his thoughts in clusters, using an online tool. My God, we had an hour discussion about this in a very focused way,
right,
that otherwise would have been all over the place.
Right. For sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
I think another big thing that leaders are going to have to adjust to in a hybrid setting is, how do you successfully facilitate a meeting where you've got half of your participants in a room and you got half of your participants dialed in from
Yes,
somewhere else? Because the
yes.
tendency will be that the discussion will start in the room, and then at some point somebody will go, "Oh, we've got some folks that have dialed in. What do you guys think?" And then you get their perspective, but then the discussion will come back into the room, and the decisions will ultimately be made there, without intentionality of saying, okay, there's got to be an ebb and a flow. Like, we can't make the locus of decision making where most of us are gathered. That's how we're going to want to do it, but we can't do that. It's got to be, the decision making power has got to be distributed amongst us, regardless of how we're accessing that particular discussion.
That's excellent. And that means a different tool,
Right.
right? That means splitting everyone up immediately and say, what are your 3 or 4 ways that we can deal with this? And then having that all posted on a white screen, and then the decision-making discussion happens.
Absolutely.
It's not an add-on.
No, for sure. And even
I love that.
things like smaller breakout sessions, the tendency will be to like have a breakout session of folks that are gathered together, and then to have a breakout session of the folks that are virtual. I think
Totally.
the folks that are doing this successfully will have a number of workstations set up in different rooms, and you'll say, okay, person A who's in the room, go into that room and have a virtual breakout session with those folks, just
That's
to try
right.
to be a little bit more intentional about it. It does requires new tools and a new mindset.
Totally, totally. Well, I know another thing that you have been getting excited about is how to deal with these hybrid teams, and rebuilding growth plans in a world of uncertainty, right? Making decisions for a future that just keeps moving.
Yeah.
What's your advice?
It's to keep if you haven't already started to reimagine what your organization or your team is going to look like post pandemic, now is the time to do it. As we just touched on at the beginning of the call, so much has changed and shifted for us all personally and individually, and some teams and organizations are starting to have that conversation about what's shifted for them, what truly is still a core value, a core aspect of our mission and our vision, and or what's shifted. So have those discussions and begin to cast a longer term net, begin to plan out for the next 18 months or so, because that's the only way that you're going to ensure that you're on the front foot of growth out of it, but also to have a ruthless focus on the next 30 to 90 days at all times, for at least until the World Health Organization undeclares this a pandemic, because we're seeing in literal real time anything can shift at any time. And even though we believe that we're emerging, and I hope that we are, it may well take longer than we think. There may be some ups and downs and squirrels and roadblocks, and so those organizations that are going to be successful in this is managing those two dual perspectives. Where do we want to get to over the next 18 months, and what are the warning signs that we need to keep a handle on in the next 30 to 90 days?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's a scenario for you. So I'm a leader, and I've got this hybrid environment, and I'm struggling a little bit. I want to keep making sure I'm doing the things that you just said with engagement. Um, what kinds of things would you do with this leader to have that person be self-evolved?
Well, one of
right?
one of the cruxes of being a self-evolved leader is a continual push for growth and development from your within. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book was I think that too often leaders wait around to be developed by their organization. So they're going to get put through a training program, or they're going to get put in a stretch assignment. And actually, those leaders that are the most effective over the long term are the ones that have that internal desire and push to grow and develop. And part of that process is about constantly asking for feedback, both positive and negative, on whatever's happening at the moment. And moving to a hybrid world is clunky, and it will continue to be clunky. And not being afraid of saying to your team, hey, this is new, it is different, and it isn't just in person with virtual tagged on. We've got to think about this in a different way, involving them in a discussion that says, how do we facilitate team flow, ensure that the work goes to the right places? How do we ensure that we're continuing to connect with each other on a personal level? How do we ensure that we're holding each other accountable in this hybrid world, rather than feeling like you as the leader have to develop that all on your own? Engage your team in solving that problem, and then have short-term feedback loops that asks your team what worked well about what we did. So, let's say you've switched your monthly review meeting from completely virtual to hybrid. Well, at the end of it, save 5, 6, 7 minutes and say, okay, what worked well about this process? What didn't work well? What should we do differently next time to improve this, so that you can incrementally get better at those things?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Now, in terms of folks that you have worked with, can you give an example of, wow, this person did it right? You don't have to name names or company, but here's the kind of thing he or she did.
Yeah, I'm working with a president of a high-end men's fashion retailer at the minute, and one of the things that he is wrestling with is uh, a group of employees that are finding more and more what's true and valuable for them means that they don't necessarily all want to come into the office and or the store all the time. And so he's engaging in conversations with his best people that says, okay, rather than you go find a job elsewhere, how do we create a work environment that is going to work for you long time, but also serves the interests of the organization? So it's part of that notion of the symbiotic conversation, which is approaching tough, difficult conversations in an adult to adult way that says, hey, there's a way in which we can create a solution that values both of us, that values and honors you as an individual and the organization. And so he's coming up with his team some really inventive ways for how people are going to deal with hybrid working environment. And it's, some people are moving away from the home office location, are given the opportunity to come in once, twice a week or a month and work virtually in other ways. But it's not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
It's really getting down and saying to the individual, okay, what's important to you? What do you value? What about your work life do you want to maintain? And how can we support that, rather than how can we make that more difficult for you?
Right, right. And then I would assume, and maybe he's lucky enough that this hasn't happened, but I'd assume there might be some folks who say, I don't think it's going to work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And however, because we've had this discussion, it's being done in a respectful way.
For sure. And the outcome of any conversation between a leader and somebody on their team, if the outcome is, I don't think this is going to work out, is not necessarily a bad outcome to get to. Sometimes it's the best outcome to get to, so long as the process that you've gone through is in a way that honors and respects both parties, and that's handled in an adult way. And, I think there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this isn't going to work out, but you know what? I wish you all the best, and let's ensure that
Absolutely.
we do not lose contact, and then you've got lifelong relationships there that at some point may well come back. And I think the other thing that is important in thinking through this is just the sheer nature of the labor market, and the difficulty that folks are having in hiring at the minute is requiring more and more of a bespoke approach to how you're going to help support potential employees in this whole area of hybrid working and
Yeah.
work-life balance. It's no longer enough just to offer people huge sign-on bonuses to have them come work for you if they're going to have to come to the office 5 days a week or 6 days a week. It's got to be more than that.
Yeah, and a lot. I can't wait to start making this master list of what was the creative approach here, what was the creative approach there.
Right.
Right, we can guess, and I'm hoping there's some. Oh my gosh, I've never thought about that as a way to do it.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah,
that the shift towards hybrid is, and this is the other thing, I do think that some leaders think, well, it'll only be hybrid for a while and then it'll go back to in person.
uh,
That's that you're not putting that genie in the bottle. We're
no,
we're at some
no,
point going to be all living in the metaverse where, I've got an avatar and we meet in some world somewhere else to have this discussion, and somebody
I
else is in
know.
the office and we've got to deal
I
with
can't
that.
wait.
Like we just got to go with it. We got to keep moving that direction.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but as our listeners have most definitely figured out, Dave is from Northern Ireland, and but just as you said, it's almost right there on the border, right, in terms of a lot of Scottish in there.
Well, there's a very a shared lineage between folks in Northern Ireland and Scotland. We come from very similar ancestral backgrounds, and so we share a lot in terms of perspectives of the world and the way that we view things and
Yeah,
and
that's
problems.
fabulous. That's fabulous. Well, Dave, how do we get in touch with you? How does the audience get in touch with you?
Best place to go if you want to learn more about me is to go to davemccune.com. If you're interested in the book, go to selfevolvedleader.com. There are links to Amazon and other places that you can pick it up. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter at Dave McCune, and happy to connect with anybody there as well.
Oh, fabulous. Mitch, you have just seemed to have been sitting there listening like crazy and taking notes. Do you have any final words for us?
What I really enjoyed about this podcast was really the encouragement to have more conversations. And in fact,
Mm,
I think if we would maybe this is maybe our 50th podcast. Maybe the key to hybrid is actually being more real, being more
mm,
communicative,
mm.
and asking people what they really need,
Yeah.
which really goes back to when I think our first podcast, which was really I think we were talking about what they're finding with engagement scores were going up because leaders were asking the question, how are you?
Mm.
So it was very technical question. So
That's right.
I'm really walking away from this podcast thinking that what hybrid is going to allow us to really explore. We've been exploring into people's rooms. We here can see the books behind Dave's desk, but it's really to just kind of ask people what they're interested in. And I was listening to a radio show yesterday talking about how there are several companies that have gone towards a 4-day work week, which is
Yeah, I
something
saw
else
that.
I want to start to handle. And the gentleman said, look, you'd have to pay me at least 50% more for me to leave my 4-day work week to go to a 5-day work week. And I think the thing that's going to happen here is, you're going to have to pay me a lot of money to leave a company where they ask me what I'm thinking. They come up with solutions to really support me and to demonstrate that they care about me.
Yes. And
And
I can walk my dog whenever I want.
yeah, and if I really feel that the leaders and the team members are real genuine, then I won't be leaving in droves.
Right.
And I think it's one of the original questions we were asking as we started is, what's going to keep people with your company versus another company?
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it was culture. It is culture, but I think a lot of it is humanity.
Mm-hmm. Very
And
much so.
this goes really back to your book, being a self-evolved leader is to be self-evolved is to really, I don't know the answers. I'm always learning. And it's one of those things where I think as you started out this podcast, where there's the old form of leadership, which is I need to know what the future is and
Mm-hmm.
follow me. And then this new form, which is I don't know. I really don't know. Let's go find it out together.
Yeah.
There's the
And just
key.
having the courage to put that forward makes you a leader.
Yeah.
And so I've really enjoyed this podcast. It's been great.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave, so much.
Thank you both for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And if you're looking for Dave McKeown, it's McKeown. And with that, I want to thank you, Dave. I want to thank you, Ginny. Thank all of our listeners. If you've really enjoyed this episode, please share this with your friends. Please give us a nice 5-star review. And we look forward to seeing you next time on our next episode of Team Anywhere.